All right, guys, it's my favorite social studies unit. Favorite social studies unit. We are learning Civil War. It's my favorite. If I already didn't tell you that. All right, so here are your list of activities for today. I've already got the article. No, I've already got the PowerPoint pulled up. Make sure that you do lesson one article and then go through the PowerPoint and then do lesson two and then go through the PowerPoint. Don't get the two confused, okay? All right, so let's pull up our lesson one article. And it's talking about a divided nation. So basically, we've done westward expansion, we've explored all this land, we've moved all the way across, and we've removed all the American Indians off of their land. And now we are in a situation where we're not agreeing on a lot of things. All right, so this is called a divided nation. During the 1800s, the United States was still a new nation. After winning their independence from England in the late 1700s through the American Revolution, the United States began developing a way of life and a government of their own. Americans had begun to build towns and cities throughout the country. In the North, people built many factories and began moving away from farms to live in the larger cities. The rural South, however, still relied mostly on farming and slavery. There were many differences between the North and the South. So these factories are coming in from the Industrial Revolution that we talked about with westward expansion. So all of these factories were created, and all of these people are leaving the farms and going to these bigger cities in the northern cities to work in these factories. Even though it's super dangerous, it's um, for the most part a lot less like back-breaking work as far as being on a farm and growing crops and harvesting those crops. So these differences between the North and the South eventually caused tension between the two regions that are going to lead to the Civil War. Trouble began when Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1861. Many of the Southerners did not approve or agree with Lincoln's ideas and beliefs. Before long, several states in the South seceded. And remember, we talked about this word before. Seceded means broke away. They came away from the United States. They formed their own country and called it the Confederate States of America. A civil war is when a country goes to war with itself. The American Civil War began in 1861 and lasted until 1865, so it lasted for 4 years. It was a war like no other. Brother fighting against brother, father against son, friends against friends. Both sides of the wars won battles, but by 1863, the Northern troops began to take more control, and the South was forced to surrender in 1865. So even though the South seceded, they still lost the war. The North won the war. No one could have imagined that the war would last as long as it did. It was one of the most destructive wars in history. By the end of the war, the southern states where most of the fighting took place were in shambles. And shambles mean completely destroyed, okay? So it means like this the South no longer looked like it did. Farms were destroyed, um, railroads were destroyed. And remember, all of these things just came out. The railroads, the factories, all of these just came out during the Industrial Revolution. So all of these things are pretty new. So it was very expensive to get these things out there. And then now through this war, they've all been destroyed. And barns were burned, fields were destroyed, houses were destroyed, whether it was from lighting fire to them or in a war zone, okay? Abraham Lincoln, who was still president after the war, wanted to reunite the nation as easily as possible and help rebuild the South. Unfortunately, he would never get to carry out his plans because he was assassinated. The new president, Andrew Johnson, stepped in to set up a plan for rebuilding the South. There were some successes as well as some failures during the rebuilding time. By 1877, Northern troops left the South for good. Unfortunately, there were still some tensions left between the North and the South, and it took many, many years for the nation to feel united again. So this war between the North and the South really created a divide in our country for a very, very long time. And if you pay attention, the war started in 1861, and it was until 1877 before the Northern troops even left the Southern region. Okay. So a lot of these things, as we really get started talking about it, a lot of these things are that we're fighting over you're going to feel one way or the other about it. And you're going to see why people were upset. You're going to see why people wanted to fight for these things. The Civil War is one of the greatest wars that we can talk about for our age because it really ties into how you want to be when you grow up. How do you want your world to be when you grow up? And it's really, really just life changing learning about the Civil War. All right, so that was our Article 1. So, what we're going to do is we're going to jump to the PowerPoint. And so, basically, Lesson 1 is just introduction to what the Civil War is and how it's basically was getting started to give you an overview of what the Civil War is about. So, your learning target for today is just being able to explore the Civil War through images. So, this is a game that we would have played if we were in class. And it says, "Welcome to the club. You have just been invited to be a member of an exclusive club. You worked really hard to become a member, and your work has paid off. These are just a few more things to consider. So, listen as I read off some special conditions and rules to being a member of the club. Would you stay or would you go?" So, what I would have done is had signs posted, stay or go, and then I would have read some things off on these cards. So, as I give you suggestions of what this card says, I want you to decide, would you have stayed in our club or would you have pieced out and said, "Deuces, Miss Lewis, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't live that life." Okay. So you can only be in this club if you are 9 or 10 years old. Would you stay in our club? Here's the next rule. You can only be in our club if you like green beans. Would you stay or would you go? You can only stay in this club if your favorite color is pink or purple. Would you stay or would you go? You can only stay in this club if you have brown hair. You can only stay in this club if you have on flip-flops. All right, so the point of this game is to show you that everybody has a different opinion. Somebody may love green beans and want to be a part of this club, whereas some people may loathe green beans and say, "Absolutely not. I will not be in this club." Some people can't change the color of their hair. So if you don't have brown hair, you don't have a choice, right? So it really ties into opinions, things that you can change, and things that you can't change. All right, so now I'm going to go into present mode so we can look at these picture cards. So it says skim the article on the left. Notice the words that appear in all capital letters. So it's talking about the words here, these words here, and some of these words down here at the bottom. What is the mood of the article? Remember, mood is the feeling. How does the article make you feel? So it says war declared, Friends of the South and justice to arms. Abraham Lincoln, unholy and unjust, tyrannical war, despotism, unalterably opposed. Okay, those are all the bold words, the words in capital letters, right? In all caps letters. Somebody sounds very angry. Okay, so let's go back and reread all of the words, paying attention closely again to those capitalized words. Abraham Lincoln, president at Washington City, has declared war against the Southern Confederacy. He attempted to reinforce Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and on the 12th, I'm not sure what that says, it was bombarded and taken by the brave sons of the South. Since which time Lincoln has issued his proclamation for 75,000 troops to subjugate Confederacy. So that means he's Abraham Lincoln, the president, has collected 75,000 troops to go down to the Confederate states and demanded from each state their respective ratio of said numbers of troops, thus inaugurating an unholy and unjust war against independent sovereign states. The northern black Republican states are offering to support this tyrannical war by both men and means. Brave sons of Missouri, shall we stand still and see our Southern brothers thus tyrannized over by a black Republican despotism? No, never, never. Therefore, all who are unalterably opposed to this abolition war policy are requested to meet in Potosi on next Saturday, the 20th day of April, 1861, to take action upon the subject. So, and it signed many citizens. So the citizens came together in Missouri and decided that they were going to band together and post this in the newspaper to collect people to basically fight against President Lincoln's declaration of sending troops to the South. Was the author of this article a supporter of the North or the South? Well, I can tell you he was definitely a supporter of the South because he's talking about how these states are going to enhance an unholy and unjust war and that it's tyrannical. And tyrannical means um, basically that it's being run by a tyrant. And a tyrant is a person who's in charge of the country or the states or whatever. And he only does what he wants and he doesn't listen to anybody. And what he does is not right. And he's very mean. And um, they're basically saying that President Lincoln is overstepping his boundaries in this decision to send troops down. What do you think two arms means? Does it mean two arms? No, 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 no. First of all, that's the wrong two. That would be TWO, 1, 2, right? This is talking about guns. Arms are being referred to as guns. So they're saying war is declared. Friends of the South and justice, get your guns ready. Okay, so they're saying we're going to fight this. All right, so here's the next picture card. What do you think is about to take place in this painting? Well, it very much looks like they are about to head into a battle. Which flag represents the North? The American flag. So this is the North, and this is the Confederate flag. And you guys should be pretty familiar with this flag because we live in the South, and I know you can see one of those flags in lots of different places, okay? So this is the Confederate flag, and this is the American flag. So here is the Union, and here is the Confederacy. What thoughts do you think are going through their minds? Well, they're probably angry, especially the South. They might be scared going into battle. There's a lot of things that they could be thinking, right? Because it looks like this is about to get really ugly. They are really about to go at it. And if you look here, we talked about this on our field trip, and Daughtry was able to explain this. So this is a gun right here. And if you look at this little piece coming off right here, that is the bayonet. That is the sharp knife that they have attached to the end of their guns because their guns are not very accurate yet. The technology has not come out for very accurate guns. So the closer that they get, they can use those bayonets to help kill the opposite member. And also, it's very famously quoted from the Civil War, don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. Because as the Civil War was going and it was getting closer to the end, they were running out of supplies, especially the South. And because their guns were so inaccurate, they were told by their commanding officers, don't shoot until you can see the white in their eye because they were more likely to shoot accurately. They were trying not to waste the musket balls. And so then if they did miss, they were in close enough proximity to use that bayonet. All right, here's the next picture card. Describe the scene. To me, it makes me feel very sad. I see some hurt horses. I see some hurt men down here. Um, it looks like they have been fighting for a while because of the flag being in shambles. Um, it looks to me like the Confederates are the ones who are winning this battle over the Union, because these would be the Union soldiers down here. Notice the flag. What do you think has happened to the flag? They've obviously been um, in war for a little while here in this battle. Um, what do you think, just looking at the flag, that this says about this war? It was very dangerous. It was very, very dangerous. And, you know, we talked about before we started this with the picture cards that the South was in shambles. So you can imagine, look at how destructive the scene looks. I mean, the South just would have been totally demolished. All right. So this one, I wish I could zoom in on it a little bit, but it says, do you think this takes place before or after the war? And I'm going to tell you, I personally think that it takes place before the war, because this woman looks very Southern with her big bell bottom dress on, her big bell dress. She looks like a Southern belle. And it also looks like I see a Confederate flag back here, and it looks like he has a commander's uniform on. So I am going to say, and these look like railroad tracks or like trolley tracks or something. I'm not really sure what that is. Um, so I'm going to assume that this takes place before the war, because prior knowledge tells me that the South was left in shambles after the war and these buildings are still standing. So I think this was before the war. And it says, why do you think the couple is hugging? What do you think is about to take place? I think they might be hugging because I think he might be getting ready to head off to battle. I think, and it looks like he's in his battle uniform. So maybe they're getting ready to ship out and she's hugging him because she's worried for him. And I just answered this last one, that I think it's in the South. And I told you what helped me decide that. All right. So, who or what kind of person do you think is sitting on the horses? So these are going to be like your commanding officers. These are the people who are up in the military chain. Okay, the people following behind are going to be people who are just soldiers. Okay, they don't have any title in the military. What do the people on the ground tell you about their expressions and their body language? What's the mood of the scene? Remember, mood is feeling. So their expressions, they look very defeated. It looks like he's got like a head wound on. They don't look very happy. They're definitely not celebrating. So I'm going to say sad again. It looks like another very sad event. All right. So who would these people be in this painting? They would be slaves. Okay. Um, they are in a slavery situation. They are working the fields. Um, it says, how do you think the situation in a scene is related to the Civil War? Well, slavery was a big point of conflict between the North and the South. So the South was all for having slaves because they needed them to help work the fields. But the North said, you can't own people. I don't care what their skin color is. You cannot own another person. So it definitely led to a lot of tensions in the Civil War. All right, so look at this picture card. This is an actual newspaper release of when Abraham Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth in the um, in the theater. So it says, how old was he? So he lived from 1809 to 1865. I'd have to get my calculator out to tell you how old he was, but you would subtract 1865 minus 1809. And I just told you John Wilkes Booth assassinated him, but why do you think he did that? Why would he want to kill Abraham Lincoln? Well, we know that at this point, the war has already ended. Okay. The Northern troops came out at 1877. So I can assume that John Wilkes Booth was from the South and he was very upset with Abraham Lincoln, and he took it out on Abraham Lincoln. All right. This one is a sales flyer for slaves. Okay. So it says, what is this poster advertising? And what are they selling? They are selling African Americans. Okay. And don't get offended by these words in here because these are the common words from that time period. It is very inappropriate to use these words in this day and age. Um, I will not condone using any of these words. It's not appropriate. Do not ever speak these words in real life, okay? Because this is an actual firsthand source. I'm showing you this, okay? But do not think that using that terminology is okay because it is not, okay? All right, what do you think cargo means? So, cargo is like a shipment, a package. So, and it's typically a shipment via the ocean. So, it's typically coming on a boat. Um, all right, and David and John Dees, it says down here, they are the slave traders. They are the ones who are trying to sell these slaves that they have gotten from Africa. All right, so lesson summary. There were many differences between the North and the South, and these differences caused tensions between the two regions. Eventually, there was a war in the 1800s, and it was called the Civil War. All right, so now it tells you to imagine that the United States was split into two countries. How would our lives be different? Well, I can tell you my family probably would have never come down here because I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So I may not even be a teacher in the South. If we were two separate countries, my family probably would have never come down here. And I would still be in the North. So you would not be getting the experiences that I've been able to offer you. And you wouldn't have hashtag best teacher ever, right? Just saying. All right. So let's go back to our slide. Now, your independent practice is going to cover lesson 1 and lesson 2. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up so you can see it. After you finish lesson 1, I want you to go ahead and do the journal question for lesson 1, okay? It's not super hard. And then most of the work that you're going to have to do is going to come from lesson 2, okay? All right, so let's pull up our Reader's Theater for lesson 2. And I'm not going to read this to you. I'm just going to show you what it looks like because I want you to be independent on reading some of these things on your own. So remember that narrators are the ones who are telling the audience what's going on, and the characters are the ones that are involved in the actual scenes, okay? So you would see a Captain Walker, you would see a John, a Thomas, and a Jeremiah. The narrators would just be telling the audience what's going on. And Captain Walker is the captain of a cargo ship. So remember, cargo is a package of things that are coming. And John, Thomas, and Jeremiah are all sailors on that ship. So they work on that ship, okay? So you would read through that. It's just 2 pages. It won't take you very long, but you need to make sure you read it because it has some very important information about the slave trade in there. So please, please make sure you read it. Okay, then you would go back to your independent practice and complete this in here. So let's go to our slides again. So your learning target for lesson 2 is going to be able to continue to describe the differences between the northern and the southern regions. So here is the United States. So let me put this into present mode. So all of this orangish, brownish color right here are states that allow slavery, okay? So this is called the Mason-Dixon line right here. And it's because it separated the states between who was allowing slavery and who wasn't, okay? So most slaves that were trying to escape had to make it past the Mason-Dixon line in order to get into freedom, okay? So these darker green states, California and Oregon and all of these northern states over here do not allow slavery. These light green states are not even states yet. They're still, remember, that's all the westward expansion land that we just bought and went through, okay? So it's not like it's been settled enough for it to even really have a part in this war, okay? And the United States today, they included a map that was all multicolored because That's what we are, guys. We are a mesh of cultures. We are a mesh of um, skin colors. We are a mesh of um, different ethnicities. We are just the American melting pot. We have Germans, we have African Americans, we have Asians, we have Hispanics, we have white people, we have Native Americans, we have all kinds of people from nationalities, Russians, okay, from all kinds of places. And they chose to move here because we are freedom, okay? All right, so look at the population. Look at how low the population in 1850 in the South is in the urban cities. So urban are the cities, the big cities, okay? So this is 5 million people. The South probably has 7 million people living in the rural parts. So that's like where we live at. We live in the small towns, the back farms, the little country roads. They have 7 million people living in there. But guys, look, they only have like 1 million living in big cities. That's not a lot. But look at the North. In the big cities, the North has 4 million living in the big cities, and they have 14 million living in the rural parts. So the North makes up for a lot more population than the South does. So let's see, that would be 7, 8 million people in the South and 14, 18 million people living in the North. So it's a completely different number of people. Okay. That's the first problem. All right. So if you look here, it shows you just the pie chart. So this is for the South and this is for the North. 94% of the Southern population lives in rural areas, and only 80% of their population lives in rural area. All right, so looking at the North, during the 1800s, large cities began to pop up all over the North because of those factories that came up during the Industrial Revolution. So by 1860, 9 out of 10 of the biggest cities were in the North. So looking at the factories, although most people still lived on farms, more and more Northerners began to move closer to the cities and the larger towns to work in those factories. The Northern economy depended mainly on those factories and trade. Northern factories sold their goods to other Americans. However, in 1846, a law that was passed by Congress threatened this. The law lowered tariffs. Tariffs are taxes, and we learned about that during the American Revolution. They are specifically taxes on imported goods. So that's goods coming from another country, okay? So it lowered those taxes. So that means that you're getting cheaper goods from out of the country, which means less people are going to buy from small town communities because it costs more here than it would from getting it from like China. Like right now we get a lot of things cheaper from China than we do actually in our own United States, okay? And that's why Trump has upped the tariffs for China because he wants people to encourage people to purchase more things from the United States. Factories in the North wanted higher tariffs because this would encourage more people to buy the goods from the North. By 1850, most northern states had made slavery illegal. People living in the North were paid for their work. Factory workers, however, often received very low pay and worked very long hours. So let's look at the South. Many people in the South lived on small farms during the late 1800s. But the southern states were mostly known for their plantations. But what I need you to understand is that most of the population in the South did not and could not afford to live in or on a plantation. They were way too expensive. Those were the people from high society, the rich people, okay? And I'm talking really rich people. Most people owned very small farms and owned one or two slaves, and that was it, okay? But the plantations used a lot of slaves because they typically had a lot more land and grew a lot more crops. So they needed more of the, I think he's crying. They needed more help on their land and they didn't want to pay for it, okay? Most slaves in the South lived on plantation farms. However, some small farm owners would use them. By 1850, 6 out of every 10 slaves worked in a cotton field. The use of slaves made the South a lot of money because they didn't have to pay for them. In some states, the number of slaves outnumbered the amount of free whites living there. The Southern economy was highly dependent on the success of the plantations. Now, during the Industrial Revolution, Eli Whitney created an invention called the cotton gin. And the cotton gin, and if you go in here, you can click on this video right here. The cotton gin changed America because slaves weren't really needed as much because this machine could go through and pick the cotton and de-seed it, okay? So they didn't need the slaves. They weren't as reliant on the slaves as they needed to be. There are many differences between the North and the South. These differences cause sectionalism. Sectionalism is when a person or a group of people show loyalty toward one section of the country or the other. Okay, so that's how you got people who are deciding if they're going to fight for the North and people who are deciding they're going to fight for the South. So the northern states were becoming more urban, while the southern states were still staying very rural. They still relied a lot on those farms, whereas the North was relying a lot on those factories. By the late 1800s, slavery was mostly outlawed in the North, but was still allowed in the South. All right, so now I want you to go back and complete your independent practice. And if you have any questions,